In the 1980s, we had Nintendo, which was awesome, but if you wanted to play the best games with the best graphics, you had to hit the arcades. That is until 1989, when Sega brought the arcade into your living room with the Sega Genesis. Now over the years, hundreds of great games came out for the system, but these are our top 10.
Number 10.
First on our list is B Nakuru Ikari no Tekken, which scholars believe is French for Punchy Man Gets No Dating. Those scholars are wrong. It actually means Bare Knuckle, Furious Iron Fist, but Americans know it as Streets of Rage. The title basically sums up the game. You, and possibly a friend, if you have one, take your pick of a slightly diverse cast of playable characters, go for a stroll down the street, and beat the trash out of everyone you see. The game has a lot of highlights, such as tight controls, a strong musical score, and some co-op moves that make the teamwork much more funner. However, the recycled, cookie-cutter enemies, the far too lengthy artillery strikes, and the unfair difficulty of the later stages and boss fights tarnish an otherwise great title.
Streets of Rage came out in the early years of the Genesis life cycle, and we got it early on and we played it a lot. We love this game. This was a great brawler. In the same vein as Double Dragon and Final Fight, you can't go wrong with Streets of Rage.
Number 9.
Mickey Mouse Castle of Illusion might seem out of place on this list, but anybody that played this game loves it, including us. The gameplay is very simple and borrows heavily from other 2D platformers of the time, but the level design is fantastic. Every stage of every level has a different feel to it, and they are full of fun and surprises. Like that apple. That was crazy. It just chases you down that hill. The game is fairly easy with the bosses following very strict patterns, but the final boss is crazy hard. You'll probably have to play through the game a few times before you can beat her. Here's the panic-inducing Jello part of the second level, which some people still can't pass. Because of the Mickey Mouse theme, this game is very approachable to children. My kids, in fact, love this game, although it's a little challenging for the young ones. In 2013, they released a modern remake of Castle of Illusion, and it's basically a 3D platformer, so it changes the game dynamic a lot. The theme is still intact, but the levels, the bosses, everything's been changed up. But I also, if you're a fan of this game, I highly recommend checking out the new version of it. It's another great game as well.
Matt Damon. Golden Axe was released in the beginning of the Genesis life cycle and is one of many arcade ports to the system. It features 3 entirely different characters that you can play as, with their own strengths and weaknesses. And it's a 2-player, side-scrolling brawler set in a medieval fantasy world, most memorable for its fun multiplayer, over-the-top spells, midget kicking, dragon riding, and great enemy design. However, it's relatively short for a beat 'em up, even with the extra level added to the console version. And the game's difficulty comes from unfair mechanics, which forces you to exploit the weak enemy AI in order to beat it. A lot of times, you're going to find yourself having to kick people off of ledges in great numbers. Otherwise, good luck. With or without a buddy, this classic is still a blast.
Hey, check out how crazy Death Adder 2 is here. He knocks you down, and then summons a dragon to kill you. Yeah. Oh, 7! Contra Hardcore is, well, it's a Contra game. What else needs to be said? If you like the original at all, then you'll love this one. If you haven't tried this one, then do yourself a favor and play through the first level. If you don't want to keep playing, then you probably have no personality, and you probably smell bad, but that's not your biggest problem. You have no taste in video games. Anyways, it's a brilliant example of how to hook an audience, and anyone aspiring to become a game designer should study it. Now, the game as a whole is very faithful to the Contra series. It's ridiculously difficult, packed full of easy to kill grunts to mow down, massive level bosses, and it features tons of great weapon power-ups. The story allows the player to occasionally choose one of two branching paths that ultimately end up in the same place but can add a little diversity to the gameplay. As an added bonus, the game has 4 playable characters that have unique weapon power-ups, which makes multiplayer and replays more interesting. The game was released pretty late in the Genesis cycle, so we didn't play it much back then, but we wish we had. And here's a tip: pay close attention to the dialogue. We can't tell if it's this bad on purpose or not, but it's amazing either way.
Number 6. Castlevania Bloodlines was released in 1994, very late in the Genesis life cycle, so we didn't learn about it until later. It takes the traditional Castlevania formula and executes it superbly. The game uses some rendering techniques that are relatively advanced for this system, but the effect is some great and memorable level design. The addition of a second, spear-wielding protagonist with his own strengths and weaknesses adds to the replayability. Overall, the game is not as difficult as most other Castlevania titles, which is arguably a good thing, but it won't take very many attempts to be able to beat it. This is also one of the last Castlevania games the US would see before Symphony of the Night would completely change the Castlevania formula for years to come. If you are one of the many Castlevania fans that missed this gem, then we highly recommend you find a copy and try it out. Another thing that makes this game unique in the Castlevania franchise is the number of bosses. Most Castlevania games will have, 6, 7 bosses at the end of each level, but this game has 19 bosses. Every stage has a mini boss, and sometimes 2 or 3. But this game really shows how game developers figured out how to get every ounce of power out of the hardware late in the cycle. 5. Now, Jeff doesn't care about this one very much, but Shining Force 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. It's a tactical RPG that has much of the town exploration and party management one would find in a traditional JRPG. The tactical part comes into play when you enter a battle. Instead of lining up on either side of the screen and taking turns smacking each other, battles are played on a grid where each character gets a turn to move and attack, use items, or cast spells. Each party member has a class that gives them strengths and weaknesses, so party composition is important. Perhaps that's why they provide 30 characters to choose your party of 12 from, many of which are redundant versions of other characters with little backstory or relevance to the plot. Now, this does allow flexibility in selecting your units in case you want to field several of the same unit simultaneously, but otherwise many of the characters that join your party will never participate in battle. There are a few challenging battles, but overall the game is pretty easy, and even on the hardest difficulty, I have been unable to find a combination of characters that are incapable of making it through the game. The game is clearly aimed at a younger audience, but if you like games such as Final Fantasy Tactics or Fire Emblem, then I highly recommend it.
4. Granada. This is a game that a lot of people may have missed. It's a top-down shoot 'em up where each level sends you hunting after a number of targets. Upon destroying them, the level boss then appears. The entire level is laid out before you to explore as you choose, so you can approach your objectives as you seem fit. The game has an awesome array of mecha anime style enemies, fantastic music, and some of the coolest power-ups we've ever seen. One of the best features is that they've dedicated a button on the controller to lock the rotation of your tank, allowing you to strafe. It isn't perfect, but it's so much better than so many similar games that couldn't quite figure out that part. The game is very challenging too. Expect to play it several times before you're able to beat it, even on the easiest difficulty settings. Our only complaint is that a few levels feel a little bit grindy as you wander around, searching for the last couple of objectives, but the rest of the game is more than worth it.
Four?
No, 3!
Oh yeah, 3. Ghouls and Ghosts is another arcade port that showed off the benefits of the Genesis. This was one of the first games that we played on the system. In true Ghouls and Ghosts fashion, it is ridiculously difficult, and almost all of the weapons are garbage. However, the difficulty is somewhat fair. If you die, it's probably because of a mistake you've made rather than the game. And each weapon actually has a level where it's a little bit good. Not as good as the dagger, mind you, but at least they made an effort. The magic armor was a good idea, but again, the dagger's clone ability is the only one that's worth using. Now there's some crazy level design, such as running on the tongues of giant statues and some great enemies, like the Cyclops boss in the first level, or the pigmen that try to barf on you. And then what the heck is this thing? Is it a submarine? And what's better than one Astaroth? 2 of them! Surprise, you're screwed! And of course, it wouldn't be Ghouls and Ghosts without getting to the end, only to find out that you have to do it all over again to get the special weapon that you couldn't possibly have brought with you the first time around. But getting to beat Lucifer and his giant throne at the end is worth the wait. Number 2. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is an absolute classic and a perfect example of how to make a great sequel. They took all the good stuff from the first one, trimmed out the bad, filled in the gaps, and topped it all off with a little bit of multiplayer. Most notably, they reduced the length of the dreaded underwater sections dramatically, and we all hated those. The addition of the spin dash move, allowing you to instantly hit full speed, is absolutely brilliant. The 3D bonus stages are an interesting change of pace, and this is the first game that includes Super Sonic. Once you've collected all of the Chaos Emeralds from the bonus stages, grab 50 rings in any level to turn into Super Sonic, giving you invulnerability and super speed for the rest of the level. That's a much better reward than a piece of concept art. A little secret that a lot of people don't know is that a second player can control Tails and can help Sonic by fighting enemies and collecting rings. But unlike Sonic, if Tails dies, he comes right back without losing any rings. This is especially handy during boss fights. The camera sticks with Sonic, so Tails will spend a lot of time getting lost off screen, but it's nice that they give you something to do while watching someone else play. The game is designed really well in every aspect, and it still holds up today. Here are 3 games that almost made our list.
if you knew that Strider was going to be our #1 pick, go ahead and give yourself a big pat on the back and a high five. Strider by Capcom is our #1 pick for many reasons. 1. It's a fantastic, near perfect port of an amazing arcade game. 2. Levels were large and very unpredictable. You had no idea where you were going to end up. And one moment you'd enter a room, suddenly there's a giant robot gorilla you're fighting off. Then you got to slide up some crazy platform and fight these weird robot things that you have no idea why they were created. Look at those things. What the heck purpose would that serve? I have no idea. Which leads me to number 3, enemies. There were many different types of bad guys in this game. Some of them very big, some of them very small, and they all served different purposes. None of them felt cliched or overdone, or maybe you've seen them a ton of times in other video games. The boss monsters were over the top. I mean, they were huge, they were crazy looking, and at first you didn't know how to hurt them. Look at that. This is my favorite. The robot Tyrannosaurus Rex that shoots dragons. I'm not even making that up. How awesome is that? That thing is crazy looking. I love it. The main reason though is the gameplay. There's a flow to Strider that was previously never seen in any home console game before it. One moment you're sliding into a bunch of enemies, the next you might be climbing up a mountainside or having the gravity reversed while running through a hallway. This game had a fluid-like feel to the action and it was non-stop. Just check out the side-by-side comparison of the arcade to the Genesis version. There's really very little difference visually between the two of them, and the gameplay had the same feel and the same movement to it. This is one of my favorite segments of the game where you run down a hill while it blows up behind you. Have you seen that in a video game before? No. These are the top 10 Sega Genesis games ever. This list is irrefutable and perfect. And if you think there's something we may have missed as an honorable mention, you can tell us about it below. Thank you for watching, and have a nice day.